You are listening to the Game Like Training podcast, where we talk about golf practice, golf learning, golf psychology, the golf swing, PGA Tour, college golf, and all things golf. On this show, we're talking about some of the most common things going on in the golfing world. We share our beliefs and insights on the golf industry, which has really come from being inside this industry for over a decade. We try to bring on as many top quality coaches, world-renowned academics, and pioneering professors from different domains that can really help the industry and help coaches coach better or help players play better. Hey, I'm your host, Arick Zeigel.
And I'm your co-host, Chad Phillips. And to get started, I just want to say that we love golf and we love helping people. That combined has driven us to document and create this podcast. There is so much good information and strategies out there, and we genuinely believe it is our sacred responsibility to share that information with as many people as we can. Please share the podcast, like it, leave us an honest review, and make suggestions on what you would like us to cover.
Cool. So we are joined today by GLT partner and the lead instructor with the Golf Channel Academy at Pine Tree Country Club here in Georgia, Chad Phillips. Welcome, Chad. How are you, man?
I'm excellent, man. Thanks for having me here.
Yeah, of course. So this is kind of carrying on a conversation that we started at the Georgia Teaching and Coaching Summit a couple weeks ago.
Right.
So today we are talking basically all things stats. So going into a little bit kind of how stats, using a stats program or, golf statistics has helped you as a coach, as well as why it should be beneficial from a coach's perspective, and then also kind of why students should be looking into getting a stats program. Because stats has changed since I was playing. and so it's no longer as simple as keeping how many fairways you hit, how many greens you hit, how many putts you have, and if you convert an up and down. Like those stats mean nothing nowadays.
Yeah, and as far as stats, just getting a measurement and understanding where to go with the training as far as nurturing strengths and obviously improving weaknesses. And I like to do a little bit of both, obviously. And,
yeah.
And even with raw beginners starting at that beginning layer, I may not use traditional stats or new strokes gained stats. When I'll make up stats, it's like, how many good shots did you hit today?
Right.
And then just building it out from there. But obviously when we get into high performance, just tracking how many fairways you hit or how many greens is probably not enough.
Right. No, that's a good point that you just brought up there, where you can kind of create your own stats. If you're working with beginners in the game, the goal can be simply, you have a whiteboard, and if they're trying to make 3-foot putts or whatever, how many did you make out of 5 kind of thing, and they kind of continue to go through it, and you can help them track that over time. So stats can be a lot of things, for sure. So let's start with, as a coach, from a coach's perspective, why do you use golf stats with your players?
Well, I think first and foremost, it was really just a way to get some insight into what they're doing when they play golf. Obviously, the traditional way of spending time with your student is at a golf course and typically on the driving range or putting green. When they go play, and the bullets start flying, it's a little bit different. And especially when they go and play in a tournament, and us being instructors, we can't be at every tournament with our players.
Right.
So I don't get a picture. I need a picture of like what's going on when they're playing, so that those stats allow me to actually see their round of golf without being there.
Yeah, no, I think that's spot on. It's, as coaches, it's challenging because we are trying to put the pieces together. We're trying to kind of build this image from very little information. And some players are great about giving you a lot of information, and some players aren't as great. So using stats, it's there's no kind of denying what the stats are saying. So do you have players that you kind of suggest using a certain stats program, or do they kind of come to you with a plethora of different platforms?
Yeah, I've tried to commit to one in the past, but that doesn't work.
Okay.
So I have college players that they're gonna bring me stats via typically either Birdie Fire.
Yep.
Or I'm going to get them from Golf Stat.
Okay.
Which is great. And I have a lot of my other clients that I'll use shot by shot.
Yep.
I have clients that use the decade system with Birdie Fire in that.
Yep.
So we can incorporate some strategy, but I think you have to take them however you can get them.
Yeah. No, I agree. That's
And some of them come on scorecards.
yes. Yeah. Some of them do come on scorecards, and you find yourself up until 2 a.m. with an Excel spreadsheet trying to put it together. That's funny. So, do you feel like stats have made your job easier as a coach? Because you talked about kind of putting this picture together with stats to kind of guide in the decision making. So do you feel like kind of using stats has made your job easier, or when players do come with stats, is that easier than when players don't come with stats?
I would say almost 100% of the time. Yeah.
Okay.
It's not something I've I haven't put a stat to that, but I would say yes. I mean, if it gets measured, it's much easier to improve. I mean, that's my belief on it. If I have measurements, then I can make improvements. And as you know, even really good players tend to have a skewed picture of what they do on the golf course.
Yeah.
And sometimes they think they're weak in one area they're not, and vice versa.
Yeah. So this is that leads straight into the next kind of topic. So there are a lot of misconceptions within, I guess, what I would call performance expectations, and I'm going to let you start with that. Where do you see the biggest misconceptions come from, whether it's from a player or from a parent? Because I know we both spend time educating players and parents on this very topic. So what would you say are the biggest misconceptions in performance expectations when it comes to golfers?
I actually think that there are misconceptions in virtually every, I guess we would call it just part of the game, right?
Yeah.
So from putting to short game scrambling to approach shots to driving. But I would say definitely approach shots and putts made.
Okay.
I mean, those are two areas that are huge. I mean, creating the right expectation so that a player, if I feel like I'm supposed to make all of my putts inside 10 feet, and for some reason I'm making only half of them, which would be actually quite good.
Right.
My self-image is going to be that I'm not a good putter.
Right.
So now I believe something's wrong, and I'm always looking for a correction or a fix.
Right.
And if I know what an acceptable range is, then I'm going to see myself in a more positive light, and then I'm going to actually be able to work on things that maybe need more attention.
Yeah. I know whenever I'm working with somebody on putting, when they come to me for a putting lesson, the first conversation I have with them is on expectation management. And I'll drop a ball at 30 feet, and I'll drop a ball at 15 feet, and I'll drop a ball at 6 feet, and I'll say, okay, you tell me how many do you think a PGA Tour player is going to make from each one of these balls? And from 30 feet, it's surprising how many people, because it's only 10 paces, right? Like 30 feet's not that far in the grand scheme of things. Like, you get a lot of people who have a 30-foot putt, and yeah, I'm not saying you shouldn't have the intention of trying to make it, but people feel like they should make it. And I think one of the reasons the reasons for that is when you watch the Golf Channel, they don't show the guys missing the 30-foot putts. They show the guys making the 60-foot putts. Right. So anytime they're like, and now over to hole 4, something is about to happen.
He's going to make it.
Yeah, something's about to happen. Doesn't matter how far away he is, but something good's about to happen. So I think people have kind of a skewed perspective on really these performance expectations, and like you said, it really kind of affects their self-efficacy, the way they kind of perceive their abilities. And so I wrote this down: can stats help with your mental game? So expectations versus reality, or expectation management.
And it's my belief 100%.
Yeah, so it's the analogy I like to give is if you go into a test expecting to fail and you come out with a B or a B minus, we'll say, you're pretty pumped. But if you go into a test expecting to get an A and you get a B minus, you're pissed. Now, the outcome hasn't changed. You got a B minus in both scenarios, but the only thing that's changed, it's resulted in different, I guess, kind of outlooks,
Yeah,
whether you're happy or
perspectives,
mad.
sure.
Yeah, perspectives is purely how you went into it, the expectations you had going into it. So, like you said, let's dive into the approach shot one,
Mm-hmm.
because I think that's an interesting one for sure. People have this expectation from 100 to 125 feet, or even 125 to 150, or sorry, yards, 125 to 150 yards, how close they think they should hit it. And it's funny when you say, hey, do you think you're inside or outside PGA Tour proximity? And they're like, oh, I'm way outside. And you're like, no, you're actually beating.
I would say the most common, so if we're talking 100 to 125, it depends on if you're working with a college player, a junior, whether you're working with female or male, but
Yeah.
100 to 125, people are typically pitching or picturing a wedge shot.
Yeah.
Okay. And I hear often from, and a lot of times this can come from parents. So parents out there that have junior golfers, this is going to be helpful. But the expectation is, hey, we're going to hit it to 10 feet. 10
Yeah.
feet's a good wedge shot, right? Well, 10 feet, if you can sustain that, you're the best wedge player on the planet.
Yeah.
That's what you are. Stats, and I wrote down a few stats for this because I'll use these a lot with my students. But last year, 2018 season, so it'd be 2017-18, from 100 to 125, the best was Wesley Bryan, averaging 15 feet 7 inches. That's
Wow.
the best for the year. And in the middle of the pack, there was 193 people statted out, and I think there was 4 guys tied at 95th. But I picked one name out because everyone knows his name, John Rahm. Pretty good player.
Yeah.
He averaged 19 feet 10 inches.
Wow.
From 100 to 125 yards,
Right.
and that was from the fairway.
Right.
It was from the fairway.
Yeah.
They're playing off good fairways.
20 feet.
Right, 20 feet.
20 feet.
Okay. Now, does he hit it to 3 feet? Does he make some? Yeah, probably. I don't know if he made one last year, but
Right.
yeah, is he going to? Sure, he's gonna knock it in the hole from there at some point.
Right.
He's gonna hit it inside 10 feet, but he's gonna hit it outside of 20 feet.
Yeah, exactly. That's the other thing. It's an average, right? So it's not doesn't mean he's hitting 20 feet every time. Like you
That's
said,
right.
there are going to be certain areas where he is hitting them really close, and those are the ones that make the highlight reel. And then there's going to be the ones where he's
That's right.
hitting it off the green. He might even miss some greens from that distance, right? Or he's hitting it to 40 feet. Like an
Correct.
average is taking a large sum of data, and then you kind of compile it and create this average. So there's going to be some on both sides.
Yes. So when when you understand these stats, this goes back to what you were just mentioning, is that helps with that expectation management. A player hits one to 25 feet. They're not livid because they hit it to 25 feet. They understand, okay, that's in my wheelhouse. That's just
Right.
that's just where
That's
it goes.
kind of what I
sometimes.
should do. Yeah.
Right.
So I have, let me see if I can find it. It might be on my phone. I've got the basically median distance for pro, scratch, 80s
Perfect.
and 90 shooter. So we can kind of look at that yardage. Let me see if I can find it. Ramel, you might have to do some trimming of this part.
This is something that they asked Brooks Koepka about. One of the things he learned from playing this was this week,
Mm-hmm.
and he said, "Well, I learned playing the Challenge Tour that hitting it to 15 or 20 feet was not a bad shot, because it was his belief coming out he had to hit it right next to the hole." But
Right.
then he learned that, and he said that was hugely beneficial in his development as a tour player.
Right.
So as a tour
Yeah.
player, as he's getting better, he's learning that hitting it a little further from the hole is okay
Right.
from a strategic standpoint.
Right. That's interesting. Yeah, it's funny because I think this plays a big role with any level golfer, but with juniors in particular, some of these kids who are good golfers have such unrealistic expectations that they're ultimately setting themselves up for failure because their expectations are so high. They are hitting great shots and they are getting pissed off
That's right.
because they think they should be better than the best players in the world.
Yeah, and I think probably Scott Fawcett probably provided the best analogy of a sniper rifle versus a shotgun. And I
yeah.
think that's a fantastic way to look at it. It's unrealistic to think you're just going to fire that golf shot straight at your target every time.
Right.
I mean, no one's ever done it.
Yeah.
So it's
Yeah.
probably not going to happen.
Yes. So if anybody's interested in learning more about Scott Fawcett's decade system, we'll put a link in the bottom so you can kind of check that out. But that is he it's a nice approach.
Absolutely.
For sure. I've used it with
Mhm.
players where you kind of map out their dispersion patterns. And then you can use that information. He kind of has his generic one as far as depending on the yardage, how far you should aim, and then if it's a 1, 2, or 3, how you kind of adjust it from there. But I'll use that to map out players' kind of dispersions and understanding why we don't always aim at the flag because it is a shotgun spray. So I found this. So from 100 yards, the average pro, and I'm not entirely sure how old this is. 16 feet, so that's their median. So if they hit 3 balls, this is going to be the kind of one in the middle. They take away the closest and the furthest. For an 80 golfer, somebody that shoots in the 80s, it's going to be 28 feet. For a 90s golfer, it's going to be 37 feet. And for somebody shooting in the 100s, it's going to be 56 feet. That's from 100 yards.
I've seen that before, yeah. And generally speaking, I think that if somebody has this information, then they're going to play more intelligently and accept the good misses. When I'm helping players with like really not just pre-shot routine, but kind of the whole thing, the whole competitive shot routine. But after they've hit that shot and they're assessing it, it's one of understanding, was that a perfect shot, or was it a pretty good miss, or and the occasional one that's not what you want at all, that needs to be looked at and improved.
Right.
Most good golf comes from that middle pattern of just really good misses, you know.
Yeah.
And if you use those stats to aim accordingly, you'll accidentally hit it next to some flag sticks.
Yeah. So there's a lot of different stats that you can keep or that you can generate. There's a lot of different ways you can use stats. You talked about creating your own stats with kind of beginner level golfers, because you don't necessarily need to know strokes gained at that level. But with beginner level golfers, we've talked about how just understanding, having this more realistic expectation of these performance variables when it comes to stats, how that can help you maybe even play better, because it can help your mental game. If you have your expectations in check, it's going to help you be a little bit more realistic with what you think should happen. So it might be easier to accept that, bad shot when you realize, oh, that's not as bad as I thought it was per se. But then you can also use, so you can use stats to educate. You can also use stats to improve, to train. And that's kind of, I think, how we use it. I mean, we use it a couple ways. We use it to educate golfers, parents, players. This is, you come to me telling me your kid's not hitting it close enough, but this is what the stats are showing. This is what,
then you can get to the training.
Yeah, exactly. So sometimes we have to use it to educate, and I think that's valuable. But then we also kind of use it to guide us as coaches in the decision making of, especially when you start working with better and better players, you have to there's no longer always this low hanging fruit. They get to a point where it's such marginal gains, and you have to really be careful with, okay, if we put time and energy into this area of your game, are we going to see, our return on investment, essentially? Because time is, a valuable asset when you're playing collegiately or professionally, or trying to play professionally, whatever it is, because all the hours you put into that area you don't get back. So
that's a good point. I mean, and that's where I think, so at a high level, that's where you can really utilize strokes gained. So maybe a player, I get a lot of players in that 10 to, like, good players 10 to 20 feet, I'm not making enough.
Right.
I'm like, it's okay. No, I'm not making enough. And maybe their game revolves around the fact they drive it really good. Well, now they start working on 10 to 20 footers, and they start to, maybe sacrifice the practice off the tee box. Which one gives you more bang for your buck? Are you really going to make the 10 to 20 footers?
Right.
Right. Or do we want to keep driving it really good?
Right.
And I think, especially from the men's side, conversation we were having earlier, I mean, driving it good's pretty important.
Yes. Well, they've taken the data. There's a very positive correlation between club
Yep.
speed and career earnings.
Right.
The faster you swing it, the more money you're going to make.
That's
It's
right.
just the way it is.
Yeah, I guess, and to further on that point you're making, I mean, on the layering, like the beginner, and this kind of goes into like what when you guys are discussing your fair challenge points. If I'm sending a player out, it's like, listen, what we're looking for is how many good shots you can hit. You're brand new. How many good shots, and maybe how many putts you made from inside 5 feet. And then they're focused on two simple stats, but it's also a training mechanism, and it's a fair challenge for them.
Right.
You know, those challenges obviously become more elaborate and more detailed, or more specific, I should say, as you move up in performance.
Yeah.
You know, when we're working with our college players,
Right,
or someone
right.
trying to make money playing this game.
Yeah, for sure. So just to give an example, a student I work with that plays at Indiana, we were doing a stats review after her, I think it was her freshman season, and looking at, she wanted to really work on, I can't remember what yard they call it. So they use ANOVA stats, which if you've never used ANOVA, I would highly suggest checking it out. I am a huge fan of ANOVA. But she really wanted to work on what they call kind of this red zone. And the red zone is 175 to 225 yards, which in the females game is a pretty long shot, especially when you're pushing 200 to 225 yards. That's pretty long. Yeah, and she was almost losing one stroke per round from that distance. And I was like, okay, well, let's look into that. And so the nice thing about ANOVA is it actually tells you how many shots or how many data points have been collected from within that range. So I was able to break down all these kind of approach yardages, and she only hits 8%. 8% of all of her approach shots are hit from that distance.
So she's okay. Yeah.
So
there's an interesting.
Yeah, whereas
so
40% of her approach shots are hit from this yellow distance, which is yellow is 125 to 175 yards, which is basically the length of all the par threes and all of her second shots on par fours. So it makes sense why that she has more shots from that distance, but we don't want to. And this was where I had to educate her a little bit. I'm like, is it worth putting in all this time? 8%. You have 22. On average, 22 approach shots per round. That means on average you might 1.8, so 2 shots from that distance per round.
Yep.
I was like, and what are you looking to do with it?
Right. I mean, realistically, if she keeps that ball in front of her, then she can rely on her short game to finish that off. And the short game is, so if she put time into the short game, right? Then that's a value throughout the game.
Yeah.
Right. And in a number of different scenarios. You're blending that short game with other shots as well.
Right.
So, I mean, she could rely on her short game to take care of her from there.
Because 8%, because I mean, it's, 8%. So how much time should you put into something that you only do 8% of the time? It's like somebody wanting to make more 30-foot putts. Like, you're not going to spend an hour or 2 hours on a putting green trying to make 30-foot putts. Like, that is a waste of your time. So
I think Dustin Johnson's a blueprint for that. I mean, he hits driver really well, and he made a decision a while back to put time into the wedges, and has said that that's where he spends the majority of his time when he's on the range, is with a wedge and TrackMan, dialing in distances, and he just keeps posting wins.
Yeah.
He just keeps hoisting trophies.
Well, and that's the thing that impresses me with Brooks Koepka as well. I mean, for a guy that hits it as far as he does, his putter is hot. Like, the guy typically putts really
a good
well.
putter.
Yeah.
And I had one of my college players win an event this week. Monday, Tuesday. We spent last Thursday on all wedges. Hits it very far. Division II player at West Georgia. He's like, I'm playing a short course. I need wedges. He does his own. I don't do any of his stats. He does them all.
Okay.
He does strokes gained. Figures everything out.
That's
He's
nice.
like, I need to work on wedges. We spent 4 hours just dialing in wedges, different, getting a feel for distances, what club works the best, trying different shots, missing on certain sides of the target. And he went and shot 67, 61, par 70, but won by 7.
Yeah.
He's like, I'm playing a short course. I'm hitting wedges. I'm making putts right now. I just need to get these wedges dialed in.
Yeah.
So,
And he saw the value.
They did.
Yeah, it's funny. Have you heard the Maverick McNeely?
So.
There's a video. I have to find it. There's a video of Maverick McNeely. And it's just kind of one of those. I don't know if it's. I think it was a Sports Center thing. But it's where he's basically sitting there and he's reading his recruit form and basically all these coaches, the things they were saying about him, and how he'll be a solid team player that will rarely make the lineup, will rarely make the starting lineup. Nothing impressive about his game. Doesn't do anything like very well. Will never win a college tournament. Like all these kind of things that, and it's similar to like Michael Jordan, all those guys where they kind of all this negative stuff towards their game. But what he did was he started keeping stats. And I can't remember if I can't remember. I think his dad does something with statistics.
Possibly.
Yeah, like something with data in his career. So Maverick McNeely was studying that at Stanford, stats related, and used that information. He started collecting all his stats and used all that information, was reflecting, was journaling, and was keeping stats during practice, playing, and just, his game just completely flipped. Yeah. And so, stats from a player's perspective, whether you're, it depends on your goals and your motivation. If you're just playing for fun, then, you don't really need to keep stats. But if you're going to be taking lessons and kind of
trying to improve.
Yeah, and if you want to improve, then you're going to want to have some basic form of stats. And, there are a lot of different stats programs out there. I know Innova has 3 different tiers. You can just pay for a basic one, either monthly or yearly, and it only shows you like 70-some data points when I think there's like over 600 data points in the full one. So you can kind of only get part of the access to the information, so you're not overloaded with everything. But keeping some form of stats just so you can go to your instructor and coach and just here's what I'm seeing, but here's what this is saying. Like if you really want to improve, then, use some stats, because you might be surprised. You might think if you're keeping track of just greens hit and fairways hit and total number of putts, you might be like, man, I putted terrible today. Like I had 36 putts, but you hit 18 greens. What do you expect to happen? Like you hit all your greens, you're gonna putt more.
Yeah, and moving beyond, because moving beyond the just I hit this many fairways, this many greens, this many putts. If you are doing stats, it's if you hit 2 greens, you're a mid handicapper. You're gonna have fewer putts, and certainly if you're a lower handicapper as well. But there's going to be a correlation between how many greens you hit and how many putts you have, hit, right? Yeah. So, and I just think the practice of charting out your game, whether you go to an instructor or not, just the mindfulness of like, this is what I do. Right. You're going to actually see what you do. Because again, I know from a player standpoint, there was a lot of times I thought I was doing something that I wasn't out there. Yeah. And then if you do come up with a game plan, then whether that's you or you with your coach from those stats, you're more likely to stay committed to it.
Yeah,
you're more likely to stay committed because it's documented.
Yeah, and it gets kind of addicting to, to see when you put in, I want to see how it's improved. It's like some people get kind of addicted to keeping a handicap because you put in your scores and you want to see if you can get it, going in the right direction. So cool. So I think we'll kind of wrap it up, Chad, but because I think the challenge with this topic is we could talk for a couple hours on this, and we could go into a lot of different kind of ways. But I think just to summarize, from a coach's perspective, from a coach's perspective and from a player's perspective, or even from a parent's perspective, why do you think stats are important?
Well, I think, first of all, it's going to help you with your strategy. All right. I'm under the belief that anything that gets measured, whether that be in sports or in business or whatever it is more easily improved. Okay, if it's measured. Expectations are huge because that's going to affect your mindset and your attitude on the golf course. And you're out there for a long time when you're playing this game. Your attitude and your expectations are important. Being able to maintain it to finish a round of golf when you're out there for 4.5 hours is vital.
Yeah.
Aside from that, again, it's the commitment and also just the patience of getting better, and the patience of okay, if I just keep hitting it, this is what I like with my good players. Just keep putting it on the green, keep giving yourself chances, keep putting it on the green, keep giving yourself chances. I mean, and there's going to be less stress in a tournament, in a multi-day tournament, if you're not firing at flags and short-siding yourself, right?
Right.
So,
And sometimes it takes having that conversation and educating them on, you don't have to hit it to 6 feet every time. You shouldn't. You're not supposed to.
that's right. I mean, this game, it's about playing this game with some excellence, and not playing it perfectly.
Yeah, you're playing you're playing a game of statistics.
Right.
You have to be patient, knowing that any given shot can either be a great shot, an okay shot, or a not so great shot. And you don't always know which one's coming. But if you kind of stick to your strategy, so like going to Scott Fawcett's thing, you will, statistics says you will hit one close eventually.
Right.
It might feel like it takes a couple rounds, but you will start to, it all balances itself out. So,
Correct.
you have to stay patient. So I think, stats can help keep those expectations in check. Having more realistic expectations is going to help you enjoy playing a little bit more, whatever level you're at. Stats helps from a player's perspective as well in kind of guiding decision making, whether it's on course or even just in, okay, what do I need to improve? And from a coach's perspective, it really just ties everything together. Like you said, if you aren't watching your players in tournaments, I suggest you start, but you can't do that all the time. You might see one event out of their whole season.
Right.
So, you're not going to get to see them play every event. So you have to rely on, their feedback, which sometimes, that's, you can't always rely on their feedback because
you can't see it all. You're never going to see it all.
Yeah. So using stats will help you kind of piece that together and really help kind of guide that plan. Cool. Do you want to finish with anything else? Or any other stats you want to throw at people real quick?
I mean, if you're serious about your game and you're serious about improvement, and when I say serious, that doesn't mean that you're wanting to play on tour, play in college, or play tournaments. But if you're serious about having fun and getting better, just get started and look into some. You can do a simple Google search now for anything, right?
Yeah.
So
golf stats programs. Yeah.
Find some stats. There's plenty of apps out there that make it very simple. Because sometimes that's the complaint that it's time consuming. Yeah, it is, but it's a value.
It's part of the process.
It's part of the
It's
process.
part of the process.
That's right.
So the ones I would suggest looking at, Decade, Birdie Fire, Innova, and then if you really are interested in diving a little bit deeper into stats, Mark Brody is an incredible resource.
Yeah.
Mark Brody wrote a book called, oh goodness, what is it?
Every Shot Counts.
Every Shot Counts. Yeah. So Every Shot
Very
Counts
good
by Mark
information.
Brody is a great way. He developed strokes gained.
Yeah.
So he was the pioneer kind of behind strokes gained. And if you don't know what strokes gained is, then check out his book, because it's a good read and it really puts a lot of things into perspective and he gives you a lot of data so you can, whether you're a coach or you're a player, it's either going to help you better understand how to help your players improve, or from a player's perspective, it's going to help kind of keep those expectations in check. Because he does give you tour, pro, scratch golfer, and a 90 golfer. Like I'm looking at the one putt probability for all those golfers.
Yeah, which that stuff is fantastic. And I mean, then player, whatever your goals are, if you shoot 95 and you're looking to shoot 85, you can see a clearer pathway.
Yeah.
And so then you won't go and waste time at the range. You'll practice whatever needs to be practiced.
Yeah, exactly. So stop wasting time, get some stats.
That's right.
Cool. Well, thanks for joining us, Chad.
Absolutely. A lot of fun.
I love talking stats. I could do this for days. So I appreciate you coming on the show and joining us for this. I think people are going to get a lot of value from it. So anybody watching or listening, to keep up to date with us and the show, make sure you subscribe to our mailing list. Go to our website, gltgolf.com. You can subscribe on there. You will get the weekly email out, which has kind of the new podcast releases as well as new blog releases and other kind of videos that might be on YouTube. So make sure you don't miss anything. Go ahead and check that out. We're also on all the social media channels. So we're on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. You basically just search GLT Golf. Everything we publish gets put out in some shape or form on all those platforms. The podcast is also on the iTunes podcast store as well as SoundCloud, so make sure you check those out. Also, we are on YouTube. YouTube channel is Game Like Training. So if you're watching this podcast, you're already on the YouTube channel. Make sure you hit that subscribe button. Thanks for tuning in. Thanks for listening. We'll catch up with you guys next time.